Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Automation Village. My name is Chris.
And I'm Natasha, and welcome to Season 3, our first full episode of 2022.
Now, as you may recall, back in January, we actually brought you a partial episode because for the first time in 2 years of making the Automation Village, we actually had a problem with our stream. We rely on a couple of different ISPs to bring together the team from the 4 points of the globe that we normally do, and we actually lost a couple of those ISPs in a fluke accident. So we were able to sort of pivot and bring you a condensed version of the show.
That's right, but today we're going to bring you the whole show, which includes our regular Data Wave panel with Pam Moss and also Lee, Ian, and Pete.
And we'll have a spotlight on a company called Allflex that has a very cool use of SCADA to help in the prevention of rust for offshore wind turbines.
And Chris and Pete are going to bring us a short video essay later on redundancy and resiliency.
And of course, we'll have questions with Nat and our usual contest. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I'd love to. So later in the show, be ready to email me. Everyone should have my email address, but if you don't, it's natasha.lutz@trihedral.com. We're going to give you a code phrase, and we're not going to be gentle about it. We're going to let you know This is the code phrase. So you're going to put that in that's right. We're going to put it in you're going to put it in the subject line of an email. You're going to send it to me. And the first person who is received is going to get a $100 shopping voucher to an online retail store.
You could probably guess which one that is. And of course, there's some rules. If you work for Trihedral or our parent company, Delta, High Delta, you are not eligible. If you participate in the Automation Village show in any way, sorry, you can't be a part of this. But otherwise, you're good to go. And if you want to see the rest of the rules, just check the description on the YouTube stream.
And with that, let's bring in Keith for the news.
Hey
Keith,
Chris,
welcome.
how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing absolutely fabulous, thanks.
In 3 words, tell us the weather in Scotland.
It is sunny, windy, and cold.
Here in Nova Scotia, it is warm, wet, and cloudy. Just so you know, if you're keeping track at home. Now, Keith, you normally start the show with a segment we like to call Robots in Space. So what do you have for us this week?
Well, this week we're going to speak about the James Webb Space Telescope, which has arrived at its cosmic parking spot 1 million miles away, bringing it a step closer to its mission to unravel the mysteries of the universe. The observatory fired its thrusters for 5 minutes to reach the so-called Lagrange point, or L2, where it will have access to nearly half the sky at any given moment.
Wow. So I'm glad to hear that once it got to its cosmic parking place, it didn't find Elon Musk's Tesla already parked there.
Oh, absolutely. The delicate burn added 3.6 miles per hour. That's 1.6 meters per second to the Webb's overall speed, just enough to bring it into a halo orbit around L2, 1.5 million kilometers from Earth. I mean, I find it staggering that they can adjust these things so finely, so far away.
I know, right? Now, next up, you've got a piece that talks about an actual break in long-term communication here on Earth.
That's right. An undersea fiber optic cable which connects Tonga, the island of Tonga, to the rest of the world was severed during the eruption of a volcano. So on the 14th of January, a very large eruption began on Hunga Tonga, Hunga Hapai, an uninhabited volcanic island and submarine volcano on the Tongan archipelago in the southern Pacific Ocean. Now, it's estimated that there are more than 430 cables around the world spanning distances of 1.3 million kilometers, or 800,000 miles, that are used to bring telecommunications and the internet to these destinations. So to detect where the break is in the cable, they're going to send a pulse of light from the island, and a machine will measure the response time and how long it takes for the light to travel there and back, and that'll establish exactly where the break is. And then a cable repair boat will actually be sent to the location of that first break.
That's interesting because I guess I assumed when I first saw the headline that the cable was completely broken and that they'd have to like replace it. And then I had an image of these giant like rolls at Radio Shack of undersea fiber optic cable that they'd have to kind of roll out and run down the ocean.
So they do have those large rolls of cable, but what they do is they use either an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle, or a tool known as a grapnel, which is basically just a hook on a chain to retrieve the broken end. They take that up onto the ship, and then they splice in a new section of cable. They then do the same from the other end, and then the cable is repaired and placed back on the seabed. Now, it's estimated that globally there are up to 200 repairs carried out every year, but natural disasters causing them are rare. 90% of breakages come from either fishing boat nets or anchors.
Interesting. Well, I'll be more careful in the future. So finally, you're going to wrap up. We're going to talk a little bit about 5G. Now, of course, there's a fair bit of talk about 5G as being something that maybe would require you to wear a tinfoil hat. But in this case, there actually is an issue with the 5G network. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so AT&T and Verizon's expansion of the nationwide 5G service in the US, which was delayed for months because of concerns about airplane safety, actually kicked off last month without the travel chaos that the airline executives had warned about. A last-minute deal was struck to restrict the high-speed cellular service near airports, which avoided the mass cancellations. And the FAA expanded the list of planes that were approved to land in low visibility conditions at airports where 5G service is deployed. And that's the focus of the airline's concerns. So the real problem is the radio altimeters, which were developed in the 1920s and help pilots determine the jet's altitude and its distance from other objects. But it uses frequencies that are closer to the ones used by the 5G service than earlier generations of the cellular service. And you've got to think that, that's an important thing, that a plane knows how far it is from an object such as the ground when it's approaching on landing in bad weather. Aviation experts warned that the 5G interference could have a rare but catastrophic consequence for air travel, as some planes may not be able to land at airports near the 5G towers.
Well, that's really interesting. I'm a little disappointed, though, that we won't necessarily have to roll out our branded Automation Village tinfoil hats, but they're still there if we need them.
Absolutely. And that is the automation news for this week.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Keith. See you next time.
Cheers, Chris.
While it's impossible to create a completely foolproof industrial process, you can prioritize uptime by designing concepts like redundancy and resiliency into the system from the beginning, rather than adding them
as an afterthought. This approach is standard in the power industry, where it's universally agreed that the amount of acceptable downtime is none. The lights still go out, sometimes, but only after
a lot of things have gone wrong. Surprisingly, industries like water and wastewater often have a much higher tolerance for downtime, usually because of the
perceived cost of actually doing something about it. Now, SCADA systems can use redundancy in a lot of ways to reduce downtime, but for now,
let's focus on server failover, specifically hot backup failover.
And when one server fails,
another picks up where it left off
without delay.
Or human intervention.
When people think about redundancy,
this is how they imagine it works.
Just like in this intro.
But for real-life systems, redundancy looks more like
this. The server fails, hopefully someone notices, then they drive to site, boot up the backup computer, and hope that it's running a recent enough version of the application that it still talks to all their I/O. Worst of all, if that secondary server fails, then
Many fear that hot backup redundancy will be complex, will overwork the system, and use up all their bandwidth.
Or they set up 2 redundant servers on a single virtual machine.
Or 2 virtual machines in the same basement.
Or spread servers across 3 offices.
But use the same internet provider.
Or a single VPN.
In this segment, we will look at why even small companies and utilities need to integrate mission-critical concepts like redundancy and resiliency into their industrial processes. Here's a question. Is good enough good enough? And by that I mean, is a limp home policy for your backup system in any industrial control system, is that actually good enough? Of course, the answer is, it depends. So here's my problem. I have one of those donut type spare wheels. It's a limp home spare wheel. Some cars only have just the tire spray to help you with the puncture. So that donut spare wheel is not rated to go over approximately 50 miles an hour. So I can't go on interstate. So really, when you start thinking about this, that donut spare wheel is a cold backup. So for a start, I'm down. This is my downtime. I'm in the car and I can't go anywhere. So then I take out my spare wheel. Spare wheel may or may not even, be inflated right now. It may itself have a puncture. So that's the idea with the cold backup. It's not a great strategy, because now I'm checking like this to see whether it's going to work or not. And on top of that, it does not give me equal performance. What if the same thing, the nail or the debris that took out one tire, what if it takes out the second tire? I've only one spare. Some of these are the issues that you run into when it comes to backups with industrial control systems. And of course, I can't keep adding wheels in here. There's only so much room that I have. So really, it comes down to the suitability for what I'm doing. So if I was going somewhere where I'm likely to get many punctures, I should have multiple spare wheels, or I need to have technology that is not going to have a puncture. The aircraft industry employs multiple backup strategies. Just looking at the undercarriage alone, you can actually see that there's multiple wheels, and in reality, an aircraft doesn't need all of those wheels to be able to perform a landing or a takeoff safely. Obviously, the criticality of a system determines a lot of the time whether or not you're going to have redundant systems. Sometimes, though, it's just a perception of cost or complexity that prevents people from going ahead and employing redundant systems.
So how much downtime is acceptable? Now, odds are someone at your organization's already answered this question, either accidentally or on purpose. And the answer would basically come down to their perception of the cost of fixing the problem versus the cost of failure, particularly if you're a smaller organization. Now, we often pick on the water wastewater industry, but as we said before, that's an industry that has traditionally accepted a higher amount of downtime for just this reason, especially if you're a smaller utility or if you believe that you have an unimpeachable water supply. But over the last 20 years, I think we've already seen on either side of the border some examples of cases where these kinds of assumptions have led to some pretty tragic outcomes. So being a small utility doesn't spare you from the kind of regulatory compliance of a big utility, and you're not exempt from paying big fines either. Okay, This is my bug out bag. Now, a few years ago, after watching The Walking Dead, I decided that we kind of needed to be a little bit prepared in case we all had to get out of here in a hurry and stay somewhere for a couple of days. So preppers, don't judge me. I pared down what's in this bag quite a bit because I just want to make a point about redundancy versus resiliency. All right, so let's have a look. So when survivalists talk about the 10 C's of survival in the woods, we're not going to talk about all of them. We're just going to focus on 3, which is cutting, combustion, and cover. All right, so cutting, we've got this knife. It's a nice, sturdy, simple knife. It lives on my belt. I can get to it easily. I can use it to process firewood. I've also got this Leatherman, which is a bit heavy, but it's got every tool you'd ever need in that situation. So even though I pay a price, I get a benefit. And then I've got this cute little Swiss Army knife, which easily goes in my pocket. And that brings me to the point. They all don't go in my bag. As soon as I put the pack on, I put this in my pocket and this on my belt so that if I lose the bag or if I drop the knife, I've got backups on my person in different ways. Now, the other fun bit of redundancy on the knife is in the handle, it has what they call a ferrocenium rod or a ferro rod. And what that is I use the knife, which it travels with, and you scrape it along and make a spark, and you can make fire in the woods. So that's another handy form of redundancy, which brings us to combustion. That's one form of combustion. The other is more traditional in this waterproof case full of waterproof matches, bit of overkill, which has a built-in striker. It's got some tinder inside. So it is itself a self-contained fire system. Everything's a system. And also, as another layer, I've got 3 boxes of wooden matches in a Ziploc bag that, again, live in the pack. So I've got 3 different kinds of combustion, all carried on me in different ways, all work in different ways. Finally, cover. We've got this nice poncho, which is warm, which keeps me dry, but also I can use some of this cordage and another C and hang up and make a really nice shelter that I can sleep under. And while I'm setting that up, I can wear the garbage bag, which I've pulled out and put in my pocket, which can be used for a variety of different things, including a container. So I could wear that as a raincoat while I'm setting up my cover for my shelter. And then at night, another form of cover is this little emergency bivvy, which is basically one of those silver emergency blankets that looks like a sleeping bag. So again, I've got a bunch of different ways of doing redundancy. Now let's go back to redundancy versus resiliency. So here I have 3 dollar store magnifying lenses, and they're cheap, they're light, they won't break very easily, and you won't run out of them, so to speak, like you would with matches. Now, I added 3 of them. Have I added 3 new layers of redundancy to my system? Well, not if it's raining outside. And really, that's when I need it the most. So that's really what we're talking about. Like my dad used to say, when things go off the rails, they go off the rails. And it's unlikely that when something bad happens, it's only going to affect one part of your system. It can often knock out more than one. So more than one level of redundancy is important, but it's also important that you set it up in a way that you don't have a single point of failure.
In our next episode, we will not only talk about SCADA redundancy, but we will show you in real time a live hot backup failover between 4 servers in 3 different countries.
Hey, Pam, good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Chris. Hope the winter weather is treating you well.
Oh, actually, pretty well, all things considered. I can't complain. So I hear you actually had a bit of news recently, and as a result, you got all new business cards printed up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. Pretty exciting time to be in data management, that's for sure. So Aquatic Informatics from Vancouver, British Columbia came into the Danaher Water Quality Platform where Hawk and Paul and Hydromet and all of us are. So we actually are I'm working with both AQI and with Hawk with our teams and our data management teams from our sales team, services team, and support. So my new role is called a Senior Technical Account Executive, still working with our data management customers and our partners like you guys, all up and down the East Coast. Yeah, looking at 2 different logos now, but pretty excited. Some pretty great people working there. Look forward to the future.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. We're very happy here to have our data wave, our roundtable here. Here we go. Here is the most awesome team there is. Ian, Lee, and Pete. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, so excited to be here. That's for sure. So what we thought about this year is maybe to have a little bit more structure in the topics we're coming through. We took a lot of y'all's ideas from last year. And what we thought we would do for this show and the next show on the roundtable is talk more about redundancy and resiliency. Like, what's the difference? And what does that actually mean to all of us in so many different ways? And of course, all four of us here have a bit of a different perspective. Just a bit of an introduction. You know, in my world, most of you know I come from the lab world, working with water plants, wastewater plants, power plants, etc. So in my world, as a former lab supervisor, you would make sure that you had more than one instrument doing something. That in the laboratory, I may have 2 ways to run total phosphorus. I may have 2 ways to run ammonia. When I expand that out to my plants, I have process instrumentation and probes out there, but I also have capability of my operators to take field samples. Because if one goes down, I need a backup, no doubt. So thinking about that from several decades, that's what that means to me as a lab person. Does it also mean cross-training personnel? So more than one person knows, you know, where something is or how to do something. Certainly we all learned this during COVID and the whole supply chain issues we've all had everywhere, every manufacturer, every utility, every company. I think everybody's going to be rethinking that. Is it really just-in-time manufacturing still a good thing or not? But just a lot of different things. And you expand that to software. You know, what does that mean? Does it mean having stuff on more than one server? Does it mean having more than one super users? What does it mean to all of us in the software world? And that's what we're going to be talking about this month and next month. But first, I want to go to Ian to start this conversation off with a bit of perspective of like, how many layers is enough and where's the weak spot? So Ian, take it over.
Okay. So in my world, we're dealing with cyber physical systems. We're typically supplying a network by, with, and through which someone is able to access a machine. So we are yet another component of a broader system when our capabilities are deployed. So what we tend to talk about are 2 topics. One is redundancy, which can just be thought of as several of the same things running in different environments, trying to supply the same service. And then there's cyber resiliency, or just resiliency for short. Resiliency has come to embody the whole idea that you just need to make a system hard to kill. And redundancy is a part of that. But I found that resiliency is a lot easier to push forward as a process across an organization because, at least in our world, we're dealing with dynamic environments where someone somewhere is programming a new capability in at any given point in time. So in the software world, there's this notorious thing known as the chaos monkey, which was developed by Netflix. And what it does is it runs around and tests off various components at random within Netflix's environment. The result being that people over time develop ways to keep the system running in spite of the fact that the chaos monkey has struck. I am sure there are people on this who are saying, yes, but does the chaos monkey strike according to the appropriate probabilities? In practice, that doesn't really matter. What you really need to do is you need something that's going around turning things off at random. The point being that you then start to iteratively develop a more resilient system. And part of that will be adding redundant layers, but part of it will also be adding completely unique paths by which a solution can be resolved. One thing we haven't done yet is we haven't applied a chaos monkey to our personnel. And I know that that's something that needs to happen, where every once in a while someone just needs to be told, stay home today, and let's see whether or not everything keeps working. But I expect, Lee, you have much more experience with that than I do.
Hey, guys. I found a new side effect from COVID. It's I forgot how to use a razor. So anyway, hey, and I noticed in the news that we're going to, it was almost like a flashback. There's going to be a new chip manufacturer in Ohio opening up to help with supply chain as far as the chip shortage that's been wreaking havoc on our economy. And as you guys may not know, I used to be in the electronics industry, and redundancy has a negative connotation to me personally because I found myself during the 90s being redundant. And that's how I actually got into the utility business. So when we look at from making humans redundant, there's a lot of negative connotation around that. And somehow or another, we have to figure out a way to push through that, because the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear, oh, your job is redundant, that some bean counter is going to say, have a nice day, and you're going to be gone. So how do we get beyond that to get to the resilience that we need from redundancy? The only way to do that is to instill trust, right? We have to treat people with a sense of trust and prove to them that we don't view redundancy as a negative connotation within our organizations, especially with mission critical services, because the overarching theme here is one is none and two is one, right? When I had COVID, I had the access key to my Bitwarden in my mind. Okay, that's where all the passwords were for the wastewater plant. Suppose that had gone poorly. So now we have a little slip of paper in my fire safe with that password written in it. So if something happens to me, there can be a way of getting beyond that. And another thing we can do is that, since we instill trust in our organizations, is work through succession planning. Okay, so we say, I am 55 years old. Let's take a junior engineer, a junior operator, and try to work that person into knowing as much as we can. What is the cost of not having that resiliency? What is the cost of not having that redundancy in our operations? It can be loss of service. It can be SSO, it can be regulatory compliance issues. It can be just a general loss of a public relations, just a public relations nightmare. So with that being said, I'd like to throw the net to Pete to talk about his latest delve into the world of resiliency.
Thank you very much, Lee. Well, 2 weeks ago, we, as the Automation Village, had an outage, and we basically had multiple ISPs that we use, and we use it to connect all of us here together on the Automation Village in different ways across 3 different continents. And in the world of streaming and broadcast, and basically, more the entertainment industry, mission critical usually only kind of comes up for things like the Super Bowl, or something like that, or the World Cup. And what you tend to find is that people's tolerance for outages is actually higher in a lot of cases when it comes to things of that nature. So I thought it would be very interesting to maybe just make a parallel between this type of an outage where you have multiple ISPs, something goes down, and compare it then with the industrial world in terms of whether it's a utility, whether it's some private company. And the broadcast industry, a lot of what you look at is they will come back and say things like, well, if you buy good equipment, that's it, that's the key to it. So if it's a vision mixer that mixes all these signals together in different ways, that allows you to do what I'm doing now and go from A to B and all this kind of stuff, right? So you buy a really good one. So that's great. Yep. And then someone says, right, well, it's a really important show. We have 2 of them. But the problem is you're back to that 2 is 1, as you just said again, Lee, and 1 is none. So So those systems eventually do fail. And how many times have you watched a broadcast where, you know, the news anchor has connected to someone and they've connected with a satellite truck out in the field, and the satellite truck connects in and it says, and now we're going to speak to Pam Moss live in North Carolina. And Pam comes on and you're there and you're talking away, the news anchor's talking away. All of a sudden, a storm moves along the Carolinas and it knocks out the satellite truck, because guess what? The satellite truck is affected by storms. The next backup to that would be you have cellular, but cellular can be affected too with the right storm. And so that is often experienced in the broadcast world. And really it's certain systems that you can go and go beyond too. But I've watched more streams recently where people have said, I have 4 layers of redundancy with my system. And they're talking about their broadcast. And then they say, oh yeah, well, we connect the 2 vision mixers that mix the signals into one switch, one network switch, or one HDMI splitter. And you're back to, you can have 10 layers of redundancy, but you've one switch. So that's
so you're only as strong as your weakest link. Is that what you're saying?
100%. And we're aware of that very much, Pam, when it comes to broadcast and what we're doing, which is mission critical. This is it's more than fun. We're trying to deliver a message, but you know we're aware of our blind spots. In the industrial sense, and certainly with our software, VTScada, which is designed for industrial use, you can put a massive amount of redundancy if you implement it well. But it still goes back to what you just said as well, Pam. You could have all the redundant things in the world, and then you put it through one thing. So 2 servers, 1 switch. Just remember, that's not much good.
Yeah. No, it's not. You know, and that's what it came back. All the sports things we all grew up playing is, you know, you always talk about in any kind of team, whether it's a hardware, software, or personal team, it is, everybody's got to play that game, and what is that path. But that was interesting, Lee, when you were talking. I still go back to the averages that people are still their most valuable resource. And I think COVID taught us that pretty quickly. What do our systems change? And with Pete, obviously, when you've got something happening, how nimble can you be to fix it? And, you know, Ian, you were talking earlier about, you know, how many paths do you have? You know, is everything sitting in one path, all 10, or do you have multiple paths to get to one direction? It's just interesting looking at it from the hardware side and the personnel side, don't you guys think?
Yeah.
That's such a good point. Absolutely. But that whole redundancy and resiliency thing, it's confusing, isn't it? I mean, you know, to most people, they think redundancy is resiliency, and it actually isn't. It contributes to resiliency, but it may not, because, you know, if you have everything in one place and it gets hit by a flood, well, good luck.
So, Ian, you see a lot of people around, well, internationally, but definitely North America. What is that conversation going on with all the people you're talking with about resiliency versus redundancy? What are you seeing?
Everything changed a great deal about 9 months ago, and that was in the United States. And that was in no small part due to a single person named Michael Powell, working for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, going around and speaking to people about resilience. And what I found was that there was an intrinsic awareness level that just went up the way people, certainly in manufacturing, to some degree in water, about how you build a resilient system. The topic that kept coming up was the concept of monitoring and prognostics, which is that not only do I have the capacity to build a system that has automatic failover, but also I can probably detect when most systems are starting to fail. And if I embed that in, I can bring in the human component. So one of the classic issues is if, let's say tomorrow we have a large-scale cyber war, you need to have someone who knows to go in and turn a manual valve somewhere. If that doesn't exist, if you've lost that human element of, quote, redundancy, you've in fact built a system that is terribly brittle.
That's a great point.
No, yes, that's a really, really good point for that. There's no doubt that as we're training, you know, power operators, you know, any kind of transportation, water, wastewater, it's still important they know how to do it. To me, and Lee, if you agree with this, manually. And yes, we got awesome systems. Yes, and let's build them for that. but it's still that, why are they doing that? Why is it for? So if something were to happen, the operator can go flip a switch. And understand. Do you agree?
Yeah, thank God we have still a remnant of the type of culture that allows us to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps when the radio link goes down and the SCADA server is no longer accessible. And we have, during a hurricane or other natural events, it could be cyber war, it could be any number of things that allow, manual interventions to be able to allow that sense of resiliency to the system. So we need to still have the ability to turn that knob and make the adjustment during extreme. And well, of course, the system needs to be properly documented so that we don't injure anybody in an attempt to still provide services, but and proper training needs to occur so that you can't get there without having the training, the documentation, and actual simulated events that you go through this thing before the event actually occurs.
No, you're right there with tabletop exercises, live exercises. That's so important, and it has to be dynamic. You just can't put a disaster plan or recovery plan on the shelf of any company and let it gather dust. Most of us learn by doing. And having that plan is great for sure. Okay, well, thank you guys very much. I know that it's been really fun within this, Pete, with our past couple of weeks in this session, looking at resiliency in what we do. But like you said, Lee, we pull up by the bootstraps. We all adjust, right, Leon? And we adjust. We move forward, and and share our world in this time, and we all get better for it. So Ian, Lee, Pete, thank you guys very much. Everybody here on the show, thank you guys very much, and we'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.
Always a joy. Bye.
Now, the number one concern for marine-based industrial systems is, of course, sinking, but a close second is corrosion. So coming up next, we're going to talk to Afflex Technologies, and they are going to tell us about a really interesting system that they created for marine-based wind turbine systems that prevents corrosion. And actually, Afflex, little side note, is a winner of one of our sales awards at the most recent VTScada Fest. And joining us now is Martin Luxen, the technical sales engineer with Afflex Technologies in the Netherlands. Welcome.
Well, hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Could you tell us a little bit about Afflex and what it does and what markets that it serves?
Afflex is a company that produces and designs electronics for all sorts of markets. Yeah, we build machines for medical industry, offshore industry, as with the wind farms and the vessels with ICCP systems on them. So it's all kinds of industries that we serve with our electronics and software.
Now, you mentioned ICCP, which it stands for Impressed Current Cathodic Protection.
That's correct.
And that's all I know about it.
Well, it's a way to make sure that ships or metal doesn't rust, so that there's no corrosion. In the past, and they still do for ships, they use sacrificial anodes, what it's called. And what it does, it has all to do with how rust starts on a metal object. And that's all based on the physical fact that there is a potential difference between the metal and the water in this case. And that potential difference causes metal to rust. With sacrificial anodes or with an ICCP system, which is an active system, you can lower this potential difference between the two materials. And as long as the potential is similar or somewhat similar, rust doesn't occur. So that's what we actually do with ICCP. What you do is you let current flow through, in this case, the ocean, and you create a sort of shield. It's not totally my field of expertise. That's our customers, of course, but that's how it works. It lowers the potential and therefore minimizes rust.
Can you tell me about how that kind of system requires a SCADA system?
Yeah, well, we are electronic builders and software builders, so we built the electronics for the ICCP system over here. We have an S&D line. We have programmers programming the embedded systems inside the electronics on how to the current, the regulation system inside our ICCP system. In the past, it was mainly used for ships because it's standalone and you just put in a value and it regulates itself. The ship doesn't rust, so that's great. But with the offshore wind industry is growing rapidly in Europe, especially on offshore wind farms. The ICCP system can also be used to provide protection to the monopiles you see behind me.
Right.
The thing is, they are a lot of kilometers out of the coast, and you need to check on shore what is happening with every system. And if necessary, we can also change values. We have around 45 or 40 wind farms at the moment running VTScada as for checking our systems. Not all wind farms are the same. It depends on the level of protection that is required by the end user. You can protect them from the inside or from the outside, and how many anodes you have, so how many current flows you will have around the turbine. That's all dependent on the size of the turbine and things like that. So that's the main variables that I'm playing with within VTScada, because we then know what values we should check and how many values we should check per turbine. Parks go from 40 turbines to 120 sometimes even.
You say that this is a standalone SCADA system. So tell us about the sort of SCADA architecture within that wind farm.
It's not the SCADA system that is standalone. It's the ICCP system itself that is standalone. Right. So if we unplug the SCADA, it will still work, but you cannot do any monitoring from the shore. That's why we use the SCADA. And so if there's an alarm, we of course can react to it. We can check if is something broken inside the system. Is it a setting that is wrong? Do we need to change a setting to make sure that it starts working again and the alarms are resolved?
Is this a very large I/O system?
I think there are around 100 to 150 tags per turbine. It depends on the setting and the configuration, of course.
Right.
And then the number of turbines. We have actually some wind farms that are only 20 turbines, but we also have one for 120 turbines. So, but it's all copies of each other. So that's a relief for us.
You went through a process of selection when you chose this software, VTScada. Can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, why you changed in the first place and what you were looking for when you chose a new platform?
It wasn't prepared for the new Windows versions. It was not really up to date. It looked old-fashioned. So we started looking for something that always keeps going to be updated. So we did a lot of research. We saw a lot of SCADA software. I did not have any experience with SCADA. So for me, it was important that it had a short learning curve.
Right.
And drag and drop kind of system, but with the flexibility of doing calculations, because with the alarm management we do have some challenges. So we need to have some tags that you can do some calculations, and that way create certain conditions within VTScada for the alarms.
Right.
So that was the reason why we chose VTScada, was actually because it was pretty simple to build something.
Can you tell us about what kind of strategies you use to streamline your development process when you're adding new objects to create new applications for new parts of the wind farm?
Like I said, all wind farms are almost the same, depending on if there are more power units available inside the wind farm, then I have to change things. But I can work mostly from a template.
Right.
So, of course, the template keeps on updating every once in a while, and I think, oh, wow, this could be done easier, and then I do that. But most of the time, I just work from a template that actually was created, what is it, 10, 12 years ago? But it's updated because our software inside the ICCP system gets updated sometimes, so we have to have new values or new settings. So, well, some new features that you see within VTScada can be really handy just to update the whole turbine template that we have.
So you're able to create your own turbine widget and then just drag and drop that on, and then adapt it to whatever new things that you need.
Exactly, and that's what we do like most of the time.
So where do operators usually interact with the system using the screens that you created?
It depends on the demands of the end user. I know that our customer that builds the complete ICP system, and they place it inside the turbine. They like our screens. They check our screens because it's you need to know something about the system. They can check the voltages, the output current of the whole system to see if that matches what their expectations, and if a turbine is polarized, and that's an interesting term, but that means that it's at a certain point the current that you put in the ocean drops to a steady level, and that means that there's some sort of calcium layer on the turbine which protected itself, and this reduces the current that you have to put through the whole system. Those are the things they want to monitor, and they use the historical data viewer for that. With the graphs, they can easily see what values do, and if they change like in a certain expected way, they know, well, this turbine is protected.
And when you create a new when you add a new wind farm to the system, what is the testing process that you need to go through?
I have an emulation of a wind farm with 2 turbines on my desk. So I use that to put in the settings that they have for that specific wind farm that I'm creating, and I do some testing, especially on new features or things that change compared to the template that we use. That way I can test the whole system and just install it on the server, and it works 9 times out of 10.
So now that you've put all this work into developing this system and this workflow, what are your plans for it in the future?
Actually, we are working on a new main module, or new PLC, so to say, which is this one we have been using, like I said, for around 12 years. Right. We are building a new one with that's actually prepared for using in wind farms. The older system was based on usage in ships. Of course, the system works in a wind farm, but we had to build everything, and we had to build extra things for the SCADA monitoring, of course. We use Modbus. So we had to build that in our main module in the software. So with the new one, I'm also with software development together. We are looking, well, what can make our life for both parties easy, for the software and for me using VTScada, and especially that goes for the alarm management system.
Right. Well, great. Thank you so much for coming on today. This has been Martin Luxon, the technical sales engineer with Allflex Technologies. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, quick. Without looking at your watch or your phone, tell me what time it is, all right? You're right. It's time for the code phrase challenge. I also would have accepted time for one of you to win a $100 gift card at a well-known shopping thing. All right, are you ready? Do you have your email open? Have you entered in natasha.lutz@trihedral.com in the to field? All right, you ready? Here we go. Hot backup. That's the code phrase for today. Type that in the subject line. And again, send that to natasha.lutz@trihedral.com. And the last step is very important. Hit send. All right. We've already explained the rules earlier. If you want to see them again, they're in the description for this video. And I wish you all the best of luck.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. I'm so glad to be back with Questions with Nat.
So, Natasha, I'm glad to see that you've taken our theme to heart, and actually you have a redundant Natasha here in the studio with us.
Yes, but as you can clearly tell, she hasn't yet been updated to the latest version.
Oh, right. You can tell from the hair color. Right.
That's right. So let's get right into this. Chris, I've got a great question for you this month, and it is, can VTScada run on Windows 11?
Right. Good question. And the answer is yes. I've been running Windows 11 for a couple of months now with VTScada, and I have no issues whatsoever. However, we actually found during our regular testing process, we found a bug in Windows that, and this affects not just the latest versions of VTScada, it applies to all sorts of other programs, which is that under very specific circumstances, for example, if you're using dark mode with a dark background, or if you're using using a specific, plus you're using a specific color theme with VTScada, and you've disabled a window, and you're hovering above it, under very specific circumstances, the text in Windows buttons becomes invisible and unreadable. But again, it's very super specific. I've not seen it yet, but there have been people who are using VTScada who have. So our recommendation is that if you've got a choice, hold off on upgrading to Windows 11 if you can. Actually, Microsoft has offered to put a block on Windows, on VTScada users, so that you simply won't be, I think it's called a non-offer, you won't be offered the chance to upgrade in Windows Update if you're running VTScada. But you can still go to their website and do it manually. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. But if you have a choice, hold off for now. But if you do have to go ahead and do it, it's quite probable that this will never be an issue for you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that information. I do have another question, and I think it would be perfect if I asked this one to Keith. So why don't we go ahead and bring Keith back in. Hey, Keith. Hey, Pete.
Hi.
Keith, I've got a great question for you.
Actually, just before you do that, I have a question for you, Natasha, actually.
Oh, no, I'm the one in the hot seat.
I know. This is questions for Nat.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Yep. So I was asked very recently by someone, will there be a Summerfest this year?
Oh, that's a really good question, and one I haven't been asked yet, but just to give a little bit of background on Summerfest and the Automation Village for those that are new, VTScada is the company that we all work for, and they are the host of the Automation Village. So the Automation Village was not actually the entity, we'll say, that put on Summerfest. It was VTScada, but we were all there. We produced Summerfest. It was a great time. Everyone got T-shirts and sunglasses in the mail. We have not yet confirmed a date for Summerfest for 2022, but we have confirmed dates for VTScada Fest 2022. That is a 2-day event in Orlando, Florida, March 24th and 25th. The developers come, the engineers come, the salespeople come, I go. We're all there, and we have an awesome 2-day, just jam-packed event, everything VTScada. Would love to see some of our members of the Automation Village join us there. So I will put a link in the chat to where you can find out more information or registered. And again, who doesn't want to go to Orlando in winter? So there's enough reason right there. So thank you very much, Pete, for that question. So now I'm going to go right into your question, Keith. And somebody wants to know, what's the difference between third-party and open source software in industrial automation?
Okay, wow, another great question there. So let's start with open source software. So open source, like its name suggests, is a piece of software where the source code is available to the general public that they can take for use, for modification, or contribution. So they can actually change and improve the software. And a great example of that is, for example, the Apache web server is an open source piece of software. It's widely used across the world. A third-party piece of software, again, it may or may not be open source, but so it might be developed by a company that develops a piece of software that has a specific functionality, and the company is a third party to the central piece of software. So in terms of an automation product, you can have both open source and third-party components that build up to build your automation system. There is a note of caution here, however, because open source software, the source code is available, it does mean that bad actors have access to the source code and can look through for vulnerabilities or methods of attack for your software. So you have to be very careful when considering the open source components that are in use. With regards to third party, again, you don't really have any idea about what's in that third party software. And again, they themselves might use third-party components, and you have a tangled web of licensing and considerations to take account of when you're using these components. But it is a good way to get lots of varied components into an automation system.
These were really great questions this month. Please keep them coming. I really, really, really enjoy trying to stump my coworkers. So send them to us anyway. Email, on the forum, in the chat, social media, any way you can get us a question, and we'll be back next month with questions with Nat.
Awesome. Thanks, Nat. And now we are barreling towards the end of the show into a segment that we call Closing Remarks. Natasha, what do you got?
Also, if you would like to get a certificate of attendance for today, we do offer that. You do need to complete a quick survey in order to get that certificate of attendance. The link is going to be in the chat. It's also over on the Automation Village. So if you'd like to get a certificate of attendance for PDHs, please fill out that survey.
Awesome. Pete?
Please subscribe to our forum. The link is up there again. You should know about it at this stage. The Automation Village forum has lots and lots and lots of content that we keep up to date. Please subscribe there and make sure you hit subscribe on YouTube.
Awesome. And are you, Keith?
Yeah, if you're interested in trying VTScada, why not head over to VTScada.com website where you can download VTScada Lite. Now, this is a fully functional, free for commercial use 50 tag version of the VTScada product. And there are lots of people all around the world using this for really fun and interesting projects, from monitoring beehives, home breweries, home automation systems. So go head over there, download, and then have a play and let us know what you're doing with VTScada Lite. So we're really interested to hear all your fun and interesting projects.
That's great. Thanks, guys. And thanks to Pam Moss with Hawk, Lee Kibler with Riviera Utilities, Ian Schmertzler with Dispel, and Martin Luxon with Allflex. We will see you in March. Have a great month.
Bye, everyone.